Oh, hello there, and thanks for joining Uncomplicated Math today. Today we're going to be looking at how to divide decimals by whole numbers. And by the end of this video, you'll know the steps involved when dividing decimals by whole numbers. So let's get started. So in question number 1, we're being asked to divide 11 and 3/10 by 2. So looking over to the right-hand side here under our steps involved, we can see that our first step is to set up the equation. And whenever we're setting up the equations, the first thing that we need to figure out is which one of these numbers is my dividend, or which one of these numbers is the one that's actually being divided. And in this case, our dividend happens to be 11 and 3/10. So down below, we're going to write our dividend of 11 and 3/10, and then we're going to put our division bar up top. So now we're left with our divisor, or the number that's actually doing the dividing. And in this case, our divisor is 2, so we're going to write our divisor of 2 to the left and on the outside of our division bar. So now we can move on to step number 2, where we see the question whole number divisor. And the reason that question is there is because whenever we're dividing decimals, if our divisor is a whole number, then the location of our decimal is not going to change in our answer. So the first thing we're going to do before we start step number 3 of going through the division steps is we're just going to write our decimal immediately up top of where it was in our dividend, because the location of our decimal is not going to change in our answer. So now we can move on to step number 3, which is to work through our division steps from left to right. And we can see that our first division step is to divide. And we can't make a group of 2 out of 1, so we're going to move from left to right. So now we're dividing 11 by 2. And we know that we can make 5 equal groups of 2 out of 11. So we're going to write a 5 up top, making sure that our 5 is over top of our second one, because if the 5 was over top of our first one in this division problem, then it would show that we've made 5 groups of 2 out of 1, which we obviously can't do. So now we move on to the next step in our division steps, which is to multiply. And when we multiply 5 times 2, we get 10. So now we're going to move on to subtract. And when we subtract 10 from 11, we're left with 1. So now our next step is to bring down the number that's immediately to the right of the place that we just divided. So we're going to drop down our 3, giving us 13 for when we do our next step of repeating this whole process. Except this time we're going to be dividing 13 by 2. And we know that we can make 6 equal groups of 2 out of 13. So we're going to write a 6 up top and then move on to our next step, which is to multiply. And when we multiply 6 times 2, we get 12. And when we subtract 12 from 13, we're left with 1. But the problem is we can't leave this as is, because that 1 isn't a remainder. Our decimal up top is already a remainder. So we have to keep working through this problem, but we need another number to bring down in order to repeat the division steps. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write a 0 to the right of our 3, because whenever we have a decimal, if we write a 0 immediately to the right of their last decimal place, it doesn't change the value of that decimal. So when we have 11 and 30 hundredths, it has the exact same value as 11 and 3/10. So now we can resume our division steps by dropping down our 0. And now we're left with 10 for when we repeat the division process. So we're going to think, how many groups of 2 can I make out of 10? And I know that I can make 5 equal groups of 2 out of 10. So then with our next step, we multiply once again, and we already know that 5 times 2 gives us 10. And when we subtract 10 from 10, we're left with 0. So now we're finished with this division problem. We have our quotient, or our answer. So when we divide 11 and 3/10 by 2, we get the quotient of 5 and 65 hundredths. So now let's do this exact same process for question number 2, where we're being asked to divide 12 and 3/10 by 5. So our first step is to set up the equation, and we need to figure out our dividend firstly. And we know that our dividend here is 12 and 3/10. So we're going to write 12 and 3/10 down below, and we're going to write our division bar up top. We're left with our divisor of 5 here, so we're going to write our 5 to the left and on the outside of our division bar. And for step number 2 of whole number divisor question mark, we can see here that our divisor is a whole number, so we're going to bring our decimal place up top into our answer, and now we're going to move on to step number 3, which is to work through our division steps from left to right. And we know that we can't make a group of 5 out of 1, so we're going to move from left to right, and now we're going to think how many groups of 5 can we make out of 12? So when we divide 12 by 5, we get 2 equal groups of 5. And when we multiply 2 times 5, we get 10. Next we subtract, and when we subtract 10 from 12, we're left with 2. So now we're going to bring down our number that's immediately to the right of the place we've just divided, giving us 23 for when we repeat this process. And when we divide 23 by 5, we know that we can make 4 equal groups of 5 out of 23. So we're going to write our 4 up top, and then we're going to multiply for our next division step. And when we multiply 4 times 5, we get 20. And when we subtract 20 from 23, we're left with 3. So now, just like our last problem here, we're not finished. We're going to add a 0 to the right of our decimal here because we need to keep going through these division steps until we're left with nothing. So now we're going to bring down our 0, giving us 30 for when we repeat the division process. And we know that we can make 6 equal groups of 5 out of 30. So we're going to write our 6 up top, and then we're going to multiply 6 times 5, which we know gives us 30. And when we subtract 30 from 30, we're left with no remainders. So we're done with this division problem. So when we divide 12 and 3/10 by 5, we get the quotient of 2 and 46 hundredths. So hopefully by now you understand the steps involved when dividing a decimal by a whole number. Help make math less complicated by smashing those like and subscribe buttons. As always, enjoy today's math journey.